Max Borders suggests in his book, The Social Singularity, that leadership is changing from a traditional hierarchy to something new, something not yet defined, something that challenges the status quo of our life. Historically, leaders have led a philosophical position of Stoicism, Christianity, humanism, and postmodern philosophy. A leader grounded in Stoic tradition is based on logic and can be seen, felt, and touched. Ferry says humans are not, in any sense, the inventors of reality. On the contrary, we merely discover it. A Stoic believes that changes come from within ourselves, not organically from the outside. As Ferry says, we change ourselves rather than the order of things. Conversely, leadership based on Christianity is grounded in faith. Faith is what drives all Christians to believe God will always be there for them, and they should have no fear to live their lives. Christians believe in miracles. Ferry, in his book, A Brief History of Thought, says we are going to believe him because he is worthy of this act of faith and the miracles he accomplishes. In the human tradition, people take their destiny into their own hands and try to live their lives the best we know how. As with Stoicism and Christianity, there is an exception that one can effect change through leadership. Postmodernist philosophy is centered upon the belief, according to Nietzsche, that a wise man must manage to realize in himself the love of whatever happens. This means that to be wise, one should always live life to the fullest, no matter the trials that are to be endured. Bert Spector, in his book, Discourse on Leadership, a critical appraisal, describes four main approaches or models of leadership. These are the great man theory, warrior model, followers versus leaders, and managers versus leaders. The great man theory suggests that leaders come from those who are special. The Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle's articulation of the great man theory asserts that certain individuals, certain men, were gifts from God placed on earth to provide these lightning needed to uplift human existence. These great men are therefore given to us to be humanity's leaders. In the warrior model, leaders are obedient and efficient. As Spector notes, in this model, leaders are shaped by contingencies of war. Further, leaders were trained for conditions where dangers were ever present, success a matter of life and death, and unswerving obedience, a critical element of effectiveness. The goal of a warrior leader is to train soldiers to ensure they perform without conscious mental activity, and distinctly demonstrate unhesitating obedience to the will of the leader. Spector also shares that leadership can only occur if there is followership. By this, he means if a leader has no one following, he is not a leader. Conversely, followers must have someone to follow, a leader who can show them the direction in which they need to head. Spector also describes the differences between managers and leaders. Spector writes, managers manage work or people, and leaders lead people. Managers are sufficient when an individual needs only to follow procedures laid out by leaders. Managers are there to make sure all employees do the jobs required of the organization as developed by its leaders. Max Borders turns historical foundations of leadership, its philosophical underpinnings and concepts on their ear as he describes a new form of leadership that is no longer based on hierarchy. No longer will the values such as loyalty, honor, obedience, and patriotism that firmed up the hierarchy work in this new world. Borders introduces the concept of leadership via teams in this book. He makes it clear that individuals working together, regardless of the type of work, can be teammates. Together, these teams can make decisions about where the team needs to head and what it needs to do. The team concept is limitless, including not just things you would normally expect, such as administrative teams and sports teams, but also landscaping teams or design teams. Any group working together can be a team. Borders writes, "We need to stop looking for leaders and start looking for teammates. We need to find others we can trust about ideas, advice, and joint action. This is a radical idea in comparison to historical views of leadership. This concept of eliminating the leader in favor of team decision-making is a new construct. Leadership via a team instead of by a single leader requires a different sort of decision-making process, a different sort of information process. Without leaders or followers, but rather a group making and acting on decisions, the old means and methods no longer work." Borders writes that the first step is to help people develop a sense of purpose. This sense of shared purpose is essential to the team dynamics and coalesces the direction of the team, giving them shared direction and goals. The new team-oriented approach to the direction setting means we will collaborate as never before in ways that will be surprisingly well suited to our evolved brains. Without leaders, managers, queens, or kings, the team is required to work together across disciplines, functional areas, and skill sets. This is essential to this team's success. Border describes Morningstar as a highly functional organization that has eliminated managers and leaders. Borders writes that 30 years after Morningstar became self-managed, it was knocking at the door of a $1 billion a year in revenues. Transitioning to a self-managed organization was a new concept. The head of the company walked in and said to his team, "There will be no more managers, and we will operate on two simple rules. Don't threaten people and honor your commitments. Beyond that, everyone is equal. Before these rules, no one else has any formal authority over any colleague." Gary Hamel, management guru at Morningstar Self-Management Institute, describes that each colleague comes to the enterprise with the same set of rights as any other colleague. It's a subtle distinction, perhaps, but at Morningstar, you make commitments. You aren't assigned a job. Having no hierarchy in the company sounds very odd, but in the case of Morningstar, it really has worked. How does a company like Morningstar create a successful company with every person on the same level? By having everyone that joins the company buy into the concept that they are working together towards a common goal, and that together they can make decisions based on what they collectively and individually feel needs to be done and gets done. No hassle, no fuss, just results. Since the beginning of time, a chain of command has been found in most organizations and social structures. Cavemen had clan leaders. Native Americans had tribal leaders. The Europeans had kings and queens. Today we continue to have leaders of organizations. However, Border asks an important question in the face of the changing world. Will CEOs and managers also go the way of kings and lords? In the face of team-centered organizations where individuals are self-managed, this is entirely possible. When no one is longer a manager or a leader in an organization, but instead a member of a group that is collectively making decisions, the extinction of middle management class and chief executives may occur. In traditional organizations, the hierarchy acts as a mechanism for the communication of information to and from management. This flow of information is necessary in the hierarchical structure because in those different roles lack access to data and information. The leaders only know what is told to them. The workers only know what the leaders share with them. To avoid extinction, CEOs and managers need to change how they operate. Borders writes of Brian Robertson, founder of the management philosophy of holacracy. Mr. Robinson travels the world showing companies how to operate without bosses. Managers can instead be visionaries. Workers are more autonomous. Everyone is accountable to the mission. As a bonus, employees tend to be happier because they are freer. By switching from an autocratic management mentality to a visionary mentality and giving workers more freedom to control their work, CEOs and middle managers may be able to save themselves from extinction. There are numerous competing and divergent demands on our time. Dynamic, interactive, and highly selective means of communication have dramatically changed the way we gather information. Borders describes human as tribal, and that we were wired to be divided. While historically, these tribal feelings have somewhat masked due to carefully monitored formal media, today's information comes from an extremely wide and varied array of sources. These sources sometimes lack the trustworthiness of traditional unbiased news. Whether the information is centrist, right-leaning, left-leaning, far-right, or left fringe, there is a readily available source. The individuals gravitate towards their tribes where their ideals are confirmed, reaffirmed, and supported. The plethora of content, sources, and demands on our time requires us to view time in a different way and to carefully select the information we use for decision making. Borders writes that in the future, people will be guarded their time more, just as customers will be competing for it. And decentralization will increase that competition. Decentralization, Borders argues, is not as chaotic as it appears. He writes, it would be a mistake to assume that it's disorder or without structure. On the contrary, it is very ordered and there is structure. Historically, there was a clear hierarchy always at play, with clear leaders, winners, and losers. Today, those lines are blurred. When there are no leaders, there is no direct hierarchy. It can appear from the outside to be chaos. While the lines are not direct or formally vertical between leaders and followers in a decentralized society, there is still a strong sense of structure and order. Decentralized society will only work once we all, as humans, start to get along and reach out to one another for the greater good. It will be important to cross tribal lines as human race. We will need to recognize that we are different, but use those differences to make life better for everyone. Max Borders writes that we become what we follow. We shape our rules, and then our rules shape us. As our world changes to become more decentralized and team-centric, the rules must also change. The pace of change has quickened dramatically over the last few decades. The advent of social media, cell phones, teleconferences, and telecommuting have all changed the way we work, live, and operate. Borders writes, technology has the power to change rules and culture. The changes are minor, major, pervasive, and real. People text or Snapchat instead of call, email instead of memos, work from home or at a cafe. News is shared by blog or microsite where fringe beliefs can be espoused. All these things lead us to a changed future. As Border writes, we go about the world as evolved beings shaped by our rules, our culture, and our technology. These changes in technology have and will have an outsized impact on rules of culture. The changes to the rules in our culture can occur organically or it can be somewhat more systematic. Borders writes, for innovation and growth to blossom, entrepreneurs need a clear green light from policymakers that signal a general acceptance of risk-taking, especially risk-taking that challenges existing business models and traditional ways of doing things. To advance and grow, we must be willing to take risks. Organizations that do so, like Morningstar, will see substantial growth in this new environment. Borders cautions us to recognize that the old guard, those who benefit from the old ways of doing things, will fiercely guard outdated systems. But gradually, the social singularity will arrive. Organizations that give into old guard, who fail to adapt and change along with the advancing technology boom and change in culture, will fall by the wayside. Who we are and what we do is shaped by the rules around us. Our technology and culture. We need a common goal, a mission, and an endpoint so that we can meet the needs of our society. Max Borders, in his book, The Social Singularity, describes a new form of leadership, one that is based on decentralization and firmly embedded in teams. He suggests throughout the book that the future of leadership is one where collective work of individuals sets the directions of organizations, businesses, and cultures. Is he describing a Borg collective from Star Trek? No, but he is describing a world where a great man is no longer required to save us from ourselves. He is describing a world where blind obedience, loyalty, and efficiency are no longer needed because we are not warriors. He is describing a world where each person is both leader and follower, in turns based on their own skill set. Sounds like a pretty nice world to me.